So welcome everybody, thank you for having me. I'm Kyle Wilkin, I'm the Manager of Infrastructure Maintenance for the City of Leduc. So my department is responsible for overseeing the operation and maintenance of city infrastructure, such as including roadways, traffic signals and signs, sidewalks, multi-ways, sanitary storm mains and manholes, our eco station, yard waste transfers facility, as well as the overall snow and ice control policy. I'll go back one second. So I was asked to put together a presentation for you today on the City of Leduc's salt management plan, which is this document here. It's about a 49-page fully combined document with several other policies and everything else referenced within it. So if you want to go to the next slide, the reason why we came out with this and what you kind of heard today is in regards to the Government of Canada's Code of Practice for the environmental management of road salts. So the Code of Practice was developed and introduced in 2004 to assist municipalities and provincial road authorities to better manage their use of road salts in a way that reduces the harm to the environment while maintaining road safety. A couple of the main points that are on this is a salt management plan is required or should be required for any organization that uses 500 tons of road salt per year on a rolling 5-year average. There is some disambiguity in the Code of Practice. Some areas of it say and, other sections of it say or. But the main part is and or the organization has vulnerable areas in their territory that could potentially be impacted by road salts. So while some municipalities are taking that or statement where it's if you have vulnerable areas, you have to have a salt management plan. Other areas are saying and, which means you need to have both criteria in order to require this. We really only brought ours out when we hit that 500 ton road salt 5-year rolling average. But I would encourage any municipality or organization, if you have any vulnerable areas within your area of responsibility, to start thinking about putting together a salt management plan. There's a lot of things that come out as you go through this plan that will help you to reduce your salts going forward. Which brings us to the next slide, which is the development of the salt management plan. So the Government of Canada and through Environment Canada actually provides a good list of recommendations of things that need to be included within this document. Unfortunately, Environment Canada, when they receive this document from municipalities, they don't review or approve this document. This document is solely for the use of the organization that creates it. And just to be able to have a better understanding of your impacts on the environment and how you can better decrease that negative impact. So if we want to go to the next slide, we'll talk about the City of Leduc's salt management plan. So our salt management plan was introduced in 2007 in response to that 5-year rolling average on salt usage. So I'd like to acknowledge the efforts of Shelby Lowe, who's our environmental project manager, Miro Freebort, our infrastructure analyst, and Rick Sreed, our director of public services, who all put a lot of time and effort into the development of this plan. When this actually came out, I was in a different department. I was in our engineering group, so I didn't actually have any input on the actual development of this plan, whereas now I'm responsible for taking this plan to the next step and utilizing it in our operations. I'd also like to recognize the town of Ajax, City of Brookville, City of St. John's, the county of Northumberland, and the municipalities of North Wellington County. A lot of these are actually towards the East Coast, specifically Ontario for the most part. The main reason for that is their plans were the most readily accessible online, and we had a lot of actual internal staff that knew individuals in those municipalities, and we were able to leverage them for a lot of insight in the development of their plans. While we were creating ours in 2016, 2017, there wasn't a lot of these within Alberta and a lot that were publicly available. So you did see a lot of the larger cities, City of Edmonton and City of Calgary, had these documents, but a lot of them are publicly accessible, nor do they like to share them as readily as smaller municipalities. Most of the municipalities we surveyed were larger than ours, typically ranging about 100 to 200,000 population, whereas our population at the time was 30,000. Now since grown to 35. So this plan was developed through the review of the city's snow and ice control policy, our snow and ice control operations, as well as comparing them to the Transportation Association of Canada's Salt Management Guide that was created in 1999. And the synthesis of best practices, which was released in 2013. If you haven't looked at either of those documents, I do encourage you to look through them. They do give a lot of best practice and a lot of insight into salt usage for municipalities. Go to our next slide. So I'll give you an overview on our snow and ice control policy. We follow the 4 R's of salt management. It is listed in here, and that is a kind of a document from the tax standard. So those 4 R's are the right material, right amount, right place, and right time. So whenever we're going through our policy, both for review and revisions, we're making sure we're applying salt to the right locations where we're decreasing our environmental impacts. So the biggest one of that is within our residential neighborhoods. We don't actually apply any salt within our residential neighborhoods because any meltwater that comes off of that is going directly into our storm management facilities, and then from there through our storm mains into Telford Lake or the closest river body. So currently in our residential areas, we only use chip material. The salt and sand in our pickled pile is exclusively used on our collectors and arterial roads. The majority of that material, when it's placed down, we do pick it back up throughout our entire plow route. We do a windrow and removal process. So any material that we've windrowed, we've removed and brought back to our engineered snow dump facility. We use both an engineered snow dump as well as temporary snow dump facilities. The main reason for that is our facility currently, our engineered facility, doesn't have the capacity for all of the snow that we remove within the city. So any snow that we deem to be clean, and I use clean loosely because it is still dirty snow, there is still a lot of tracking of salt and sand from those arterials and collectors. But if it's a low enough quantity, we'll bring it to a temporary facility. All of our temporary facilities, as well as our engineer facility, are registered with Alberta Environment. So we do go through that process to make sure that they have a record of where those sites are, should there be any contaminants 10, 20, 30 years down the line. We know we're still responsible to clean that up. Any of our dirty snow, as I said, from those arterials and collectors is brought back to that engineered facility. We are looking at developing a new engineered facility, and we're currently right now going through land procurement. That'll be on the west side of the City of Leduc. Right now our only facility is on the east side. So there is a substantial amount of hauling that we have to do for all the snow that's collected on the west side to bring it back to the east. So our pickled sand, and you might be able to see it in the photo here, all of our traction material is stored in a fully enclosed facility. We used to use calcium chloride in our pickled sands. We've moved away from calcium chloride completely within the City of Leduc, not only for snow and ice control, but also for dust suppression. So right now we've actually, for the last 3 years, been pickling our winter sand with a beet juice material. So that's beet 55. It's a desugared beet product, and it's got about 70% less chlorides than the calcium chloride we were previously using. The main reason for that is to prevent the actual pile from freezing. While it's a fully enclosed facility, it is non-heated. It would take a substantial amount of energy to heat the facility, as we have 2 large overhead bay doors to allow our tandem trucks to come in and load directly within the facility. We do a consortium with Leduc County and the City of Beaumont for the purchase of our winter sand material. I'm sure the county might be able to attest to it, but unfortunately this year our RFP went out fairly late in the year, and we received that product quite late. And that product, when we received it, had a large content of moisture in it, large amount of water. So it actually bled from the pile quite a bit sitting outside before we brought it into our facility. When we brought it in, we mixed it with our beet juice. Typically we're using 14 liters per ton of beet juice. As we put it into the facility. This year we had to go a little bit higher because of that water content that's in there, just to disperse some of that and change what the freezing point of that water within that sand pile is. We're still having some issues, unfortunately, with that material, not in the building, but as soon as it gets on the trucks and is driving through the city with the amount of wind and everything blowing past them, some of that sand is freezing in the back of the trucks and causing some concerns in terms of how it's being discharged onto the roadway. So we are having to increase the amount of beet juice that's in it and provide sodium chloride. So the city does purchase sodium chloride, which is used at the higher temperature, so typically down to about -5, whereas calcium chloride is usually used down to like the -30s, -40s, depending on the product you're purchasing. But we're using that just to prevent it from freezing within the trucks in low quantities. For the most part, we never applied sand or salt directly to our roadways. It's only to mix within our pickled sand pile in order to change that freezing point. We do use fractured rock, what we refer to as chip, which is a 5 mil fractured rock. It is fairly dry, and typically if we've received it wet, a lot of times we'll send it out to an asphalt plant to actually be dried. We do the same process with our winter sand. Not all of our winter sand, but a small quantity of it we send to be dried. That's used in our residential bins throughout the community, as well as being able to put down as a direct discharge on the roads when we don't necessarily need any salt content or only want to provide some traction, or the chips isn't quite enough within our residential areas, we'll put down dry sand. I'll go to the next page. This kind of gives you an overview of the locations throughout the city. This is contained both within this salt management plan, but also in our snow and ice control policy, both of which are publicly available on our website. Feel free to Google them or go to our website. There is a search bar. They're easily findable through there. As you can see, all the red roads, or pinkish maybe, on the projector you're looking at right now, those are all of our plow route roads, typically that we're applying any of our treated sand to. Everything else that's not shown on that map, that's all in dark gray, is typically our residential roads and our collectors that we don't apply any of that treated sand to. And that's just going to be where we're applying our chips or dry sand. This map also includes the vulnerable areas throughout the community. So when we developed this plan, we also went through an environmental site survey throughout the entire community to identify any of those locations throughout the city that are vulnerable to that road salt. So even though we may have some areas with arterial roads or collectors adjacent to those vulnerable areas, we try not to apply any materials through those sections just because of potential contamination to the vulnerable area. So while it's shown on here, it's a plow route, typically it's an area that we would normally apply sand to. Because it's close to those sites, we elect not to anymore. I'm going to go down to the next page here. So our salt management plan, and as part of the requirements from Alberta Environment Canada, do require a list of action items that comes out of the plan. I put down some of the action items on here, and I'm pleased to say that every one of these, with the exception of equipment calibration, has been completed. And this is a working document. So while we complete these ones, we're finding new action items to then address. We haven't done a new update to this document yet. It is something I'm currently working on. We're trying to stick to about a 5-year rotation. So this 2022 is coming up on our 5 years. So we're hoping to have this updated with some of our new practices and policies. But we do review this document on an annual basis, all the way down to the operator level. So I sit down with every one of my operators, ensure that they're aware of every portion of this plan, as well as our snow and ice control policy. So it is an extensive meeting, but it is something that we feel is very warranted and very needed, just to make sure that we don't have one operator potentially loading up with nothing but salt and putting that on our roadways. It is something we track and monitor regularly. So if we want to go to the next slide, this is kind of where we're at now. So we've moved away from our calcium chloride in dust suppression applications as well as in our pre-treated sand. Currently for dust suppression, we're only using water or oil. Water, if it's something that's urgent, we need to get done right now, and we haven't had a chance to schedule a subcontractor to come out with the oil product. Otherwise, we are using 2 different oil products. I forget the 2 numbers. I think it's a DL5 or 6 and a DL20. One's a top shoot oil and one's an incorporated oil, both of which are classified as an environmentally friendly oil. I say that loosely because no oil truly is environmentally friendly once it moved into the wrong environment. But the oils that we use tend to not bleed nearly as much. If they are bleeding, that's when we're going to place down some of our dry sand to soak up that material, ensure it stays on those roadways. But then those applications last substantially longer than the calcium chloride applications that you would use for dust suppression. Typically, especially with the incorporated oil, we're only coming back every 2-3 years at the most, and that's usually to touch up those roads. Top shoot, we're usually treating about once a year, whereas calcium chloride, with the amount of traffic, we were treating multiple times a year in order to keep the dust at bay. We switched over to the Beat 55 anti-icing liquid as well as the pre-treating liquid. So we have purchased a 65,000 liter, so 400 barrel, double-walled steel tank. That's housed directly within our winter materials building. Main reason for that is the double wall gives itself a secondary containment, but then the building itself has its own secondary containment for the rest of the salts that are stored within that. It does have impervious structures, so the entire floor of the foundation is concrete. We do get quite an erosion with that salt, but then we monitor it and make sure there's no cracking and leaks through that into the subgrade underneath of the facility. So we've developed a pre-event application, so an anti-icing application program. We currently only have one truck set up to spray liquids onto the roadway. We are looking for this upcoming year. I've actually purchasing slip-in tanks for our tandem trucks that come equipped with spray bars, so that we can start using the pre-event or anti-icing applications a lot more readily. Those are typically only done at major intersections and crosswalks where we want to make sure that we're not having any of that ice forming. We don't treat any of our hard corners with it. We don't have a lot of them right now that we want to worry about, nor do we want to have that material splashing as people are driving through those hard corners. We're trying to let it stick to just where that ice would normally form, right where you're trying to brake. We do the same thing with our sand applications. We don't sand the entire street. We only stand immediately adjacent to stop walks, stop bars, through intersections, areas where we know we got large turning movements, or areas where we know people are going to lose traction, and then allow that material to track the rest of the way through the roadway. Try and stop that application of sand materials well ahead of the neighborhoods, so that we're not having too much of that sand track into the neighborhoods themselves. We've actually also purchased our first underbelly plow for the City of Leduc. Historically, we've only used front plows on all of our plow trucks. So this year we've received our first underbelly plow, and we're using that a lot, especially on our residentials and our alleys, to cut down a lot of that ice formation, those ruttings and things like that, that normally on the collector's arterials we can put down some material to help encourage it to melt, or be able to take a lot more graders out to. Whereas the underbelly plow, it's a very short wheelbase tandem truck, so we're able to get in a lot of the tight corners that the graders even can't necessarily get nearly as tight to. And it gives a lot different impression when the public sees an underbelly plow, a tandem truck coming through the neighborhood, because we're typically in there anyhow with chip products, whereas when they see a grader come in the neighborhood, they typically know it's for snow removal. We currently budget for 2 snow removal cycles a year within the City of Leduc, so that's 2 a season, and that's for our residential roadways. All of our collectors and arterials are serviced quite a bit more often. We do have a policy based off the amount of snowpack that are on those roads that dictate when those are done. Arterials and collectors are plows, routes, so those are continuously plowed the second snow is falling. And then we go into our level 1, level 2, and level 3 and 4 priorities for removal, which is our downtown core, extended downtown core, collectors, and then residentials. Currently in our snow and ice control policy, we don't have alleys listed. It is something that we are changing this year with the introduction of that underbelly plow. So if you do see that, happen to pull that policy, you'll see that change likely between now and next year, or we'll include those alleys as a 5th priority. I mentioned we're going through the development of our second engineered snow dump facility on the west side. So currently just hauling alone, we're budgeting for about $75,000 worth of increased hauling cost just to bring all that material back to an engineered facility. We're also installing stormwater interceptors on all the discharges to Telford Lake, as well as any of our creeks. There is one on our engineered facility just to collect any of the suspended solids that are still within that meltwater. And then potentially collect them with that interceptor. And then we do a yearly maintenance program to suck out any of those solids. We do have them on several of the other discharges, with the rest of those discharges hopefully being attended to in the next 5 years here. We do like to try and pilot as many new winter maintenance products as we can every year. We have ordered, or we have currently 2 Arctic Shark ice breaking equipment that's attached to either our loaders or our graders. And that's used in our residential neighborhoods when we do that removal, just so we're not putting down product to loosen that ice up from the road. We bring those ice breakers out, bust up the ice, and then collect it and put it into our trucks to haul away from the facility. We are looking at another ice breaker that's going to be more for our multi-way system. So currently right now we only put sand, dry sand on our multi-way system throughout the community. Whereas we're going to be looking at trying to treat a lot of that ice with those ice breakers and just a blade, rather than having to treat it with some kind of material. Over the last 2 years here, we've been trialing a product that's actually come out of South Korea. It's from Stars Tech. It's Eco-ST, and it's a starfish product. So it uses essentially starfish that they've removed that's damaging the coral reefs around South Korea. And instead of incinerating them, they've actually broken it out, taken the calcium chloride from that, mixed it within this salt product, which is both a mixture of calcium chloride and sodium chloride. And the intent of it is to try and bond the ions from the chloride with that carbonate to try and make it, it doesn't remove the chlorides from the meltwater, but makes them less active. So it's supposed to be more environmentally friendly. We're working with the company to make some modifications to their product as it didn't quite fit our needs currently. Should they make some of those, we may look at investigating it, but for now we've kind of paused that pilot. There are several other municipalities and contractors within Alberta that are currently trialing that as well, though. A new product that we're also looking at trialing in this new year is Snow Slicer from NSG Minerals. All of our sand right now is currently purchased from NSG. Snow Slicer is a new product that they brought out over the last couple of years. That's something we're going to look at trialing. Within the City of Leduc, it is a solid calcium chloride product, but it's mixed with another brine. Essentially, it's a corn derivative brine, and then that's applied to the road. It is supposed to be, again, more environmentally friendly than just straight calcium chloride, both in a solid form and a liquid form. There's one other thing I was hoping to talk about, but I didn't look at, doesn't look like I put it in my notes yet. So we'll go down to our question slide, and I did write down a couple of the questions that have come up through some of the other presentations that I wanted to address. One of which was just around groundwater testing and drawdown wells. Unfortunately, we've had some lessons learned over the past several years. Our old public works facility, which also housed our lagoons for our wastewater treatment, that's been decommissioned. The facility, the actual land's been handed over to a different group. Our rodeo actually owns the facility now, whereas we're responsible for the remediation for the salt damage. And that's also from, it's not just from the salt storage for winter applications, but also the street sweepings. So we do a street sweeping program where we pick up any of the materials first thing in the spring, both chips and sand material, and then store it for testing and disposal. We also reuse some of that where possible, so any of the chips that put down onto our residential roads, we'll pick those back up, and for the most part, as long as there's not a lot of garbage in them, they're fairly free of chlorides, they immediately get reused on the roads. We've actually had some years, not last year, but the year before, where January we had a big spell where it was +10 for about 2 weeks. We brought our street sweepers out of storage and actually put them out on the roads and start picking back up that material so we can reapply that material onto the roads. So all of our equipment at the City of Leduc is stored generally inside, so it does give us that flexibility that we can potentially pull a piece of equipment that's normally used for summer out into the field should weather dictate that we are allowed to be able to bring it out and pick up that material. So that did help us save a ton of costs in terms of some of that material that I was putting down and gave us a head start on picking up a lot of that material and reusing it. Groundwater testing and drawdown wells. So the big lesson learned we've kind of found at our old facility, our salt storage and the sweeping piles, they weren't covered for the most part until later in the years. So they didn't even have really a clay base to them or impermeable base. So a lot of that material did leachate into the groundwater. We've done a lot of groundwater testing and know the extent of the chloride bloom. And we've actually installed 3 groundwater wells or drawdown wells at the extent of that chloride bloom in order to capture that material before it potentially makes its way towards Telford Lake. We do that both at that facility as well as our reclaimed landfill. It's currently now a park, but there's a lot of leachate groundwater coming out of that we're actually extracting, have a permit with Alberta Environment in order to discharge that into sanitary, which then gets treated by the Commission. One of the things I want to touch on with the engineered snow dump facility, we've been, for the last 2 years now, doing a lot of water testing of the meltwater that's coming off of that, both at the actual piles and then at the discharge into the lake. We found that there is a substantial higher concentration in that meltwater first thing in the spring. That's largely because that sodium chloride, as soon as it melts, or as soon as it warms up, that's the material that's melting first. That concentration then drops substantially over the summer. So we're actually looking at changes both to our existing facility and the new facility where we can divert a lot of that meltwater away from the streams and creeks and the lake and either send it into sanitary to the Commission, where we'd have essentially a policy with them to reimburse based off of the amount of chlorides that are in that, or to a different holding facility where it can later be tested. We're also looking at a new trial this year with, forgetting the name, another company in our region. They've actually brought out a reverse osmosis process that treats meltwater from storm ponds. It is likely going to be a very expensive process, so we're looking at trialing in a small quantity this year to see its effectiveness and see what that cost is right now for changes. Luckily, our council has been very encouraging in terms of making sure we have the funds and expertise needed to enact some of these new pilots and policies. I know Jeremy touched on it earlier, our catch basin cleaning program. We have come out with an annual cleaning program of all the catch basins along our plow routes. So that's anywhere we're putting that treated sand. And then it's every other year throughout our residential communities where we're cleaning out those catch basins. We are going to be starting to actually monitor the amount of buildup within those catch basins so we can better change when that certain communities or certain neighborhoods need to have their catch basins cleared versus others, depending on the amount of water that's flushing into them and the amount of buildup in those sumps. There was a comment around using just chips on a lot of the roadways, which absolutely fantastic if we can do that. Unfortunately, it is a balancing act for a lot of municipalities. We're balancing the tax increases of the public and the amount of costs we're putting into our winter maintenance program. It is a lot easier, unfortunately, to put down salt and smaller traction material than it is the chips. The quantity in terms of chips versus sand, right now we currently have about 10,000 tons of sand within our storage facility and probably about 500 tons worth of chip material. Substantial difference, but the cost implications of the two, the actual unit rates are fairly similar, but the size of the chips unfortunately takes up a lot more volume. So in order for us to put down those chips in the same capacity we put down the sand, we'd be into the millions of dollars instead of the hundreds of thousands of dollars for sand material. There was a question earlier in terms of collaborating with other municipalities. So the Alberta Public Works Association does work very collaboratively together, not only on winter maintenance and salt programs, but also summer maintenance programs. So they have several different working groups or idea groups within the province. For our region right now, it's the Northern Alberta Idea Group. I believe we were supposed to meet here in December, and I think it's been pushed off into the new year. If you're interested in trying to get your ideas out to that idea group, by all means, reach out to your municipalities, to your public works groups, have them bring those ideas forward if they're a part of those associations. If not, encourage them to attend those meetings. It's a good spot where we can all collaboratively pass ideas back and forth. I know I've gotten probably 3 or 4 emails from that group just of other ideas municipalities have brought forward.